There are names in history that make the world bow, and there are names that make historians tremble as they write them. In China, a land where dynasties rose and fell in fire and blood, the throne belonged only to men. The emperor was the son of heaven, and the mandate of heaven could never fall into a woman's hands. And yet there was one who defied that law. A woman who not only stepped into the heart of power, but ascended the highest throne, declaring herself emperor and ruling over a vast empire. Her name, Wu Zetian. But do not imagine this story as simply a tale of triumph, the classic female hero fighting a patriarchal society. If that's what you think, sit down, because history is never that kind. Wu Zetian's story is not just illuminated by glory, it is shadowed by unfathomable darkness. Behind the image of a commanding empress lie blood-soaked pages, chilling rumors of murdered children, crushed traitors, and a network of spies so lethal that one word could cost a head. Yet if you stop there and label her merely as a cold-blooded tyrant, it would be too simple. Wu Zetian also opened the imperial examinations to the lowborn, granting opportunities to those who never dared dream of power. She promoted agriculture, sponsored culture, and turned Buddhism into a spiritual force that unified the empire. In many ways, she swept away the stagnant aristocracy of the Tang court, replacing it with a new apparatus of power, efficient and ruthless in equal measure. So who was she really? A bloodthirsty despot, or a reformer vilified by history simply for being a woman? Perhaps both are true. Tonight, we step into the shadows of the 7th century, where the Tang imperial palace became a board of blood. Every step of Wu Zetian, from a delicate concubine to China's only female emperor, will unfold before your eyes. And with each chapter, we will hear a whisper: does power care about gender, or is it simply a hunger that consumes men and women alike, never sated? If you want to understand Wu Zetian, you cannot begin at the moment she sat on the throne, nor from the chilling tales of intrigue and assassination in the imperial palace. Every path to power has a starting point, and for her it lay in the roots of a family that was not particularly noble, yet different enough to plant a seed of ambition in her from an early age. Wu Zetian was born in 624, during the reign of Emperor Taizong of the Tang Dynasty, a ruler renowned for his military victories and rare political insight. The Wu family did not belong to the royal lineage, nor were they an illustrious clan with centuries of prestige, but they were wealthy and held a tradition of civil service. Her father Wu Shihuo served the court and was known for his generosity and a certain openness that defied the rigidly patriarchal norms of the era. It is said he allowed his young daughter to learn to read, to study books, and even to join in discussions with the men of the household. Such details may seem trivial, but in a society where women typically only memorized a few Confucian classics as preparation for domestic life, a girl who could access history, literature, and even Buddhist, Taoist, and Confucian philosophy was extraordinary. It was in these formative years that Wu Zetian devoured knowledge, not to become a dutiful wife, but to nurture a mind eager to step beyond the shadows of men. That desire in another woman might have remained a quiet dream buried by everyday life. But history, as it often does, only needs a crack, an opportunity for a soul like hers to ignite. The 7th century was a time when the Tang dynasty flourished, the empire prosperous, and the capital Chang'an dazzling as the jewel of the world, where Persian merchants, Indian scholars, and missionaries from the western regions gathered. Yet behind this splendor, women remained tightly constrained by Confucian principles. A good woman was praised for her silence, obedience, and willingness to live in the shadows while the spotlight shone on men. The Confucian ideal of womanhood revolved around the 3 obediences and 4 virtues: obeying father, husband, and sons. There was no room for a female emperor, and certainly none for a woman daring enough to envision ruling the empire herself. Yet in this seemingly closed society, a girl from the Wu family entered the imperial court. At 14, Wu Zetian was selected for Emperor Taizong's harem, with the title Karen, a low-ranking concubine among hundreds, without power or prestige, destined to live and die in obscurity. But within the cold red walls of the Chang'an Palace, she began learning the most important lesson. Politics was not only on the court floor, but in every glance, every whispered word behind the silk screens. Emperor Taizong was known for his intelligence and strictness. He saw women not merely as objects of pleasure, but as instruments to challenge and reveal wit. Thanks to her early education, Wu Zetian stood apart from other concubines who only sang and danced. She could quote the classics, debate ideas, listen, and respond thoughtfully. It is said that Taizong, though, seeing her as a minor concubine, enjoyed discussing matters of state with her and even entrusted her with the palace library. Imagine a delicate teenage girl walking among shelves of military strategy, history, and imperial edicts, perhaps quietly telling herself, "This is the world I am meant to belong to." Life in the palace taught her to see the harsh realities of power. A single compliment could elevate a woman like a shining star. A single rumor could plunge her rival into oblivion. Wu Zetian witnessed concubines competing for favor, where the victorious gained imperial attention and the defeated faded into silence or death. This was not just a game of feminine rivalry, it was a microcosm of political life. And she understood that survival demanded more than intelligence, it required ruthlessness. Her years beside Taizong did not grant her real power, but they tempered her like steel in a fire. At an age when most girls dreamed only of peace and comfort, she observed every move of the emperor, learned how words could shape the world, and grasped the fragility of imperial favor. Every banquet, every debate, every palace whisper became a vivid lesson etched into her memory. It was here that the seed of ambition truly took root. Wu Zetian did not see the throne as a fanciful dream. She saw it as an empty chair, waiting for someone smart and ruthless enough to claim it. In a dynasty monopolized by men, she dared to imagine the opposite. And the most dangerous thing in the world is not a beautiful woman nor merely a clever one, but a mind that combines intellect, ambition, and the opportunity to prove both. In her early years in the Chang'an harem, Wu Zetian appeared as nothing more than a small figure among hundreds of concubines, remarkable only for her beauty and intelligence. Yet history never favors those who shine too early. It rewards the patient who linger in the shadows, waiting for their moment to step into the light. In the quiet of the harem where whispers could cut like blades, Wu Zetian began forging her greatest weapon, the patience to wait a lifetime if necessary for the day she would ascend the throne. And when Emperor Taizong's death drew near, when all paths seemed closed to her fate, opened a surprising door. But that is a story for another chapter, where ambition would no longer sleep, but step boldly into the light. The death of Emperor Taizong of the Tang Dynasty in 649 did more than close the chapter on a brilliant reign. It snuffed out the lone light illuminating Wu Zetian's life. According to court regulations, any concubine without a child to continue her line had to leave the palace upon the emperor's passing. They were sent to monasteries, donned the monk's robe, and resigned themselves to lives of solitude and prayer. It was not a choice, but a fate. And so the clever young palace maid, who had once conversed with Emperor Taizong, became a novice nun. Her head shaved, seated in a cold meditation hall, listening to the tolling of the temple bells that reminded her from this moment her life had effectively ended. But history has never been kind to souls, unwilling to lie quietly. Surrounded by chanting and incense, Wu Zetian's mind could not stop turning to the court beyond the monastery walls. She knew she was not dead, and somehow fate might yet offer another chance. That chance came in the form of Li Ji later, Emperor Gaozong of Tang, the son of Taizong. It is said that Li Ji had encountered Wu Zetian while still a prince. Among the countless palace ladies, perhaps her gaze had left an indelible mark on him. When he ascended the throne, he did not forget that image. On one visit to the monastery, he saw her again as she struck the wooden bell during her prayers. The nun's robe could not conceal the intelligence and charm that had already taken root in his memory. Like a thread of destiny, Li Ji brought her back to the palace. Returning to court, Wu Zetian was no longer the naive 14-year-old concubine. She entered as someone who had been buried alive and had returned to reclaim her breath. But ahead of her lay another battlefield, no less brutal than any warfront, the inner court of Emperor Gaozong, where Empress Wang and consort Zhou held sway. Empress Wang was the legitimate consort, the one who sat proudly as the mother of the empire. She commanded influence a powerful family, and naturally she did not welcome a former nun encroaching on her throne. Consort Zhou, meanwhile, was the emperor's favored beauty, skilled and graceful, making her a formidable rival. In a game where both pieces were already in position, Wu Zetian appeared as the third, seemingly weak, suspicious, yet precisely because of this deadly. Historical records tell us that the struggle in the palace was not fought with swords, but with schemes, poisonous whispers, and the skill of turning favor into a weapon. Wu Zetian quickly won Gaozong's trust, not just through beauty, but through intelligence, convincing him that she alone could share the burden of ruling. Yet to become Empress, love alone was not enough. She had to eliminate both Empress Wang and consort Zhou. Then came one of history's most chilling tales. Wu Zetian gave birth to a daughter who died unexpectedly, just days later. Rumors whispered that Wu Zetian herself had killed her child, only to blame Empress Wang. Such an accusation was terrifying. Harming an imperial heir was tantamount to treason against heaven and earth. Gaozong, enraged and grieving, turned against the Empress. Empress Wang and consort Zhou were swiftly disgraced, deposed, and eventually executed in shame. Whether Wu Zetian truly killed her own child remains a mystery. It may have been a stain painted by later historians, or she may have dared the unthinkable to seize the throne. Whatever the truth, the outcome of that game was undeniable. Empress Wang was deposed, consort Zhou removed, and Wu Zetian ascended as Empress. That moment marked a turning point not only in her life but in Chinese history. For the first time, a woman rose from the shadows into the center of power. She was no longer a palace maid, no longer a nun, but the Empress, standing beside the Emperor in all ceremonies and crucially beginning to influence governance. Yet the throne of the Empress was never a place of peace. It was merely a higher step, opening the way to even more merciless battles. From here, Wu Zetian would face not only jealous concubines but also a court of male nobles, men who had never believed a woman could intervene in politics. And as we will see, she would do more than confront them. She would quietly begin a campaign to dismantle the pillars of that male-dominated world. But before she became emperor, before her name haunted history for millennia, Wu Zetian did the simplest thing an ambitious person must do: remove her rivals and claim her place. From that foothold, she would embark on a journey that even the harshest historians must admit was unparalleled in the thousands of years of Chinese history. The throne that Wu Zetian seized was never a gilded seat to lean back on in comfort. It was more like a jagged cliff where a single misstep could send you tumbling into the abyss. Favored and granted power by Emperor Gaozong, she still navigated a world where sweetness was only a veneer masking daggers and poison beneath. From the moment she became Empress, Wu Zetian began shaping a harsh inner court, not merely to maintain her position but to transform it into a personal engine of power. Within the palace, every word, every glance, every step could spark a conspiracy. Consorts who once stood near Gaozong, who once dreamed of winning his favor, were gradually eliminated. Wu Zetian did not wait for fortune to smile upon her. She acted decisively, wielding accusations, setting traps, and occasionally arranging mysterious deaths. Stories circulated of a once beloved concubine disappearing overnight, no one daring to ask why, only rumors hinting at punishment for treason. Princes fell ill and died suddenly. Officials were accused with evidence seemingly conjured from nowhere. These vanishings, repeated over time, created a chilling atmosphere, as if an invisible hand were squeezing the entire court. Wu Zetian understood that power could not rely solely on an emperor's affection. Gaozong loved her, but he was weak-ill and easily swayed. One day a faction might be strong enough to influence him, and the Empress's position could be lost. So she built a parallel system of control alongside the official court. Spies and informants infiltrated every corner. From the inner palace to the outer officials, no one could be certain they weren't being watched. A careless word at a banquet could be twisted into treason. A friendly connection with an old faction of a former queen or concubine could become evidence for prosecution. This network functioned like a tightening net. The more one struggled, the tighter it constricted. Those loyal to her rose swiftly while the suspicious disappeared. Even within the royal family, she showed no leniency. Princes were exiled, some died suddenly, and whispers spread that she would rather kill her own children than relinquish power. Whether true or not, the tale painted her as a lioness, ready to tear apart anyone, even kin, who threatened her position. Fear soon blanketed the court. Officials summoned to the Empress trembled, as if walking toward the execution ground. Concubines whispered in the shadows, never daring to speak her name. Even Gaozong, the nominal ruler, often found himself overshadowed by the cunning, cold presence of his wife. He relied on her to govern, yet feared her resoluteness. But to view Wu Zetian merely as a female tyrant would overlook a bitter truth. The inner court had always been a battlefield. Since the Han and Weijin periods, consorts, empresses, and dowagers had fought to survive. Conspiracies, deaths, poisonings were never scarce. The difference was Wu Zetian's unparalleled success. She not only survived, but turned the ruthless rules of the game into a means to consolidate power. Her actions could send chills down the spine, yet in many ways they mirrored what generations of men had done, only they faced fewer moral condemnations because of their gender. Later, Confucian historians relentlessly portrayed her as a seductress, a tyrant, a stain on history. Yet from another perspective, Wu Zetian was simply someone daring enough to play the power game to its absolute limit. Where others halted for morality, convention, or mercy, she pressed forward cold and determined, and thus she triumphed. In the shadows of the palace, amid thick walls and distant echoes of Buddhist chants, a terrifying reality took shape. No one dared underestimate the woman named Wu. No one saw her as merely a beautiful figure beside the emperor. She was a true center of power, a colossal shadow cast over the court, and from that shadow, nightmares of a blood-soaked empress would gradually spread, gripping history for 1,000 years. During the years when Emperor Gaozong's Tang dynasty seemed solid and unshakable, a quiet but profound shift was taking place behind the palace walls. The emperor, the nation's supreme ruler, was gradually weakened by illness, while the imperial harem, once merely a space for domestic affairs, emerged as a center of power. Wu Zetian, initially positioned as an empress, began to stand shoulder to shoulder with the emperor. No longer content with lingering in the shadows, she stepped forward, took her place alongside the throne, and in doing so, a mechanism unprecedented in Chinese history took shape. The dual sovereign, where two people could issue edicts and shape the destiny of the empire together. Looking back, it's easy to wonder why Gaozong allowed this to happen. As the son of the famed Emperor Taizong, he should have possessed a strong, commanding presence, yet he gradually faded in his wife's shadow. The truth lies in his failing health. Illness left him unable to fully manage state affairs. Relentless headaches, bouts of temporary blindness and chronic fatigue made him increasingly dependent on others' judgment. And who was more capable, more astute, more willing to bear responsibility than Wu Zetian? At first, her intervention in government matters was seen as supportive, a dutiful wife stepping in to assist her husband. She read memorials on his behalf, drafted edicts when he was too weary, consulted with officials and reported back to the emperor. But what began as a temporary measure soon became permanent. Court documents started bearing the marks of both the emperor and empress, and the people began referring to this arrangement as the dual sovereign system. In the eyes of the populace, the empire no longer had a single son of heaven. There were two, and often the voice of this woman rang louder than the emperor himself. Yet Wu Zetian's power did not rest solely on her husband's frailty. She understood that the court was a minefield filled with factions ready to oppose her. Loyal ministers who had once served Empress Wang or consort Zhou generals who despised women and even princes within the royal family could become threats. Wu began building a network of control within the court. Loyal officials were promoted to key positions while opponents were gradually removed by any means necessary accusations of corruption, incompetence, or even treason. One of Wu's most ingenious strategies was her ability to recruit and empower talent from the lower ranks of society. Those who had no standing among the nobility became fiercely loyal allies when she offered them opportunities. She transformed previously unknown individuals into political instruments, forcing long-established aristocratic families who had long dominated the court to tread carefully. Her boldness redistributed power. It no longer rested solely with a few prominent families, but revolved around Wu Zetian herself, the new epicenter of authority. The relationship between Wu and Gaozong grew increasingly complex. Many records depict her as both a devoted wife and a decisive ruler, at times even overshadowing her husband. Yet anecdotes also suggest that Gaozong was not entirely opposed. He occasionally accepted Wu's arrangements as a way to maintain balance in the court. Perhaps within him, there was a tension between the pride of an emperor and the relief of having someone capable shoulder the heavy burdens of rule. Whatever the case, their joint governance was not merely a personal compromise, it marked a political turning point, paving the way for Wu's ascent. Fear spread throughout the court. No one could be certain of retaining their position from one day to the next. A whispered complaint, a misstep with the opposition, or even a wary glance from the Empress could lead to the loss of rank or of life. It was this harshness that made Wu both feared and despised. Many viewed her as a rising tyrant, yet few could deny that her iron-handed measures prevented the court from collapsing during the emperor's weakness. Among the people, the perception was more nuanced. They witnessed a government still functioning, laws being enforced, and daily life continuing without the chaos that had accompanied weak rulers in the past. The presence of a female ruler was not universally accepted, but many could not deny that Wu Zetian presented a new image, a woman not merely managing the harem, but running the empire itself. Later histories often describe the dual sovereign period as the moment when Wu fully asserted her power, no longer hiding her ambition. She stepped into the light from the shadows of the harem, rising from behind the emperor to stand as his equal, eventually surpassing him. If before she had relied on intrigue to eliminate rivals within the palace, she now held a legitimate position co-ruler, directly issuing decisions alongside the emperor. This chapter in retrospect is not just a story of a man's decline and a woman's rise. It reflects a profound shift in the power structure of the Tang dynasty. For the first time in Chinese history, an empress was not only a wife or the mother of princes, but a co-emperor. And from here, the question was no longer whether Wu Zetian had enough power to dominate, but how far she would go, and who could possibly stand in her way on the road to the throne itself. There is something strange about power that it often resembles a candle. When the light of one ruler flickers and dies, there is almost always someone nearby, ready to reach out and catch it before it falls into darkness. For Wu Zetian, the death of Emperor Gaozong of Tang was nothing short of a fateful moment. Her entire life had been preparing for this instant, and when the final breath of the frail emperor faded within the palaces of Luoyang, Wu Zetian did not weep as a grieving wife. She stepped into a new role, that of regent, a mother empress of all under heaven, though in reality she was the emperor in all but name. On paper, the throne passed to her eldest son, with Gaozong Emperor Zhongzong of Tang. But to Wu Zetian, Zhongzong was merely a pawn. So naive that the moment he ascended the throne, he openly intended to share power with the Wu clan of his mother. Many saw this as filial respect. Wu Zetian saw a rare opportunity to consolidate all authority in her own hands. Yet she did not rush to claim it. Instead, it was Zhongzong's own impatience that led to his deposition. With a brief imperial edict, the young emperor was stripped of the throne, and his brother Ruizong was installed in his place. The empire was stunned, the court trembling. Everyone understood that the Tang throne had become a stage, the emperor, a supporting actor, and Wu Zetian, the director behind the scenes. From this point, Wu Zetian began to craft an unprecedented persona. In traditional China, empresses and empress dowagers usually remained in the background, tending the inner court and embodying virtue. Wu Zetian refused to settle for such a shadowed existence. She proclaimed herself Mother Empress of all under heaven, and this title was no mere honorific. It placed her at the center of power, not just as the emperor's mother, but as the direct executor of the mandate of heaven. In court sessions, she would sit behind a screen, listen, and then issue decrees. Officials dared not defy her, princes bowed in obedience, and the people gradually accepted that the voice of a woman now dictated the fate of the empire. Wu Zetian's brilliance lay in her patience. She never claimed the title of emperor outright, knowing that a sudden move would provoke fierce resistance. Instead, she used her two sons as shields, thin veils hiding her ambitions. During this period, she mastered the art of political maneuvering, strengthening the court by appointing loyal, low-born officials rather than ceding power to aristocratic families who despised her. Through this, she created a new bureaucratic class, one whose loyalty was to Wu Zetian herself, not the Tang clan. At the same time, she harnessed religion to sanctify her position. Buddhism, flourishing in the Tang era, became her spiritual weapon. Sutras and sermons extolled a holy mother saving the world, spreading her image far and wide. In the popular imagination, Wu Zetian was no longer just the emperor's mother. She was a living bodhisattva sent by heaven to guide the realm. Slowly, she wove a mythology around herself, leading the people to accept the existence of a powerful female sovereign. Yet to maintain her grip, Wu Zetian did not shy away from bloodshed. Princes' potential threats from birth lived in constant fear. Many died young, some from illness, others from false accusations, and some simply vanished from history. Loyal Tang ministers were purged, dissenting voices silenced. Rumors even spoke of Wu Zetian personally interrogating accused traitors, forcing confessions without evidence. The inner court, once a battlefield of rivalries, became a place of silence, where all eyes avoided the woman on the regent's throne. Still, her ruthlessness was masked by the dazzling veneer of Mother Empress of all under heaven. Rituals, banquets, and rewards demonstrated her supposed benevolence, her care for the people and the empire. To contemporaries, her image was enigmatic, both a merciless woman, unafraid to kill her own children to protect power, and a shrewd ruler who brought stability amid chaos. This very contradiction made her fascination in history all the more intense. Looking back, Wu Zetian was like a tightrope walker. She had to balance personal ambition with dynastic legitimacy, the fear she instilled with the trust she needed from her subjects. She could not declare herself emperor immediately, but she would not remain a shadow behind the screen forever. Her regency became the perfect stage to remove obstacles and to accustom the empire to an unavoidable truth: the Tang throne would ultimately belong to a woman. Wu Zetian's years as regent reshaped not only the court, but the very perception of women in China. She dared what no one else could, shattered the rigid rules of female propriety, and proved that in the world of politics, gender was not a barrier, but a prejudice that could be crushed under the heels of power. And then, once the empire had grown accustomed to her presence on the throne, once resistance had been trimmed like grass, Wu Zetian was left with only one final step to transform herself from regent into emperor. A step that would make history shiver, for in thousands of years, no woman had ever dared what she was about to do. In the year 690, Chinese history witnessed an unprecedented and unforgettable event. Wu Zetian, a woman who had long been confined to the shadows of the imperial harem, officially declared herself emperor. Not empress, not a regent acting on behalf of the throne, but emperor rising above the throne and the laws themselves, the ultimate center of power. She took the bold step of renaming the dynasty from Tang to Zhou, a move that carried not only political weight but symbolic significance, signaling to the world that from this moment on history would be rewritten on her terms. Wu Zetian's enthronement took place in a magnificent palace, accompanied by ceremonies of unprecedented grandeur for a woman. Officials, generals, princes, and commoners alike gathered to witness the event, and none dared to question the authority she now wielded. Clad in imperial robes and crown, seated upon the throne with her hand on the scepter, she became a living symbol of power, the likes of which no woman in thousands of years of Chinese history had ever achieved. Later, historians would describe the scene with a mix of awe and fear, calling it a spectre of authority that enveloped the court. Yet for those who witnessed it, it was a moment when an entire dynasty bowed before a phenomenon never before seen. The renaming of the dynasty from Tang to Zhou was far more than a ceremonial flourish or clever wordplay. It carried profound political meaning, challenging the entire Confucian order, which held that the Son of Heaven must be male, and that absolute power could never rest in the hands of a woman. With a single audacious move, Wu Zetian shattered this tradition, proving that historical status was not bound by gender. She asserted that power was not a legacy passed down from father to son, but a prize for those with ambition, intelligence, and decisiveness to seize it. Yet this bold declaration of authority was neither simple nor symbolic alone. Declaring herself emperor meant confronting an entrenched bureaucracy, religious institutions, and a society accustomed to the old order. Long-established noble families, Confucian scholars and officials loyal to the Li clan all had to come to terms with the reality that supreme power now rested in the hands of a woman. Wu Zetian understood that acceptance would not come from goodwill, but from fear, and the undeniable truth that only she possessed the ability to govern. Immediately following her enthronement, she implemented measures to consolidate her authority, appointing loyal officials, eliminating opposition, and employing propaganda and religious sanctification to reinforce her image. A crucial aspect of claiming the throne was crafting the persona of Heavenly Empress to its fullest extent. She was no longer just a dowager empress or a regent. She positioned herself as the direct representative of heaven and earth, the guide of the people, and the arbiter of the nation's destiny. Buddhist scriptures were widely disseminated, sanctifying rituals became political tools, and the populace gradually became accustomed to revering female power in ways never before seen in Chinese history. In this way, Wu Zetian did not merely occupy the throne, she occupied the minds of her people. This moment also marked a turning point in perceptions of power and gender. For centuries, women had been considered secondary in Confucian order, confined to the inner court, to childbearing and to maintaining the family line. By stepping into the light, Wu Zetian broke every barrier. She demonstrated that women could succeed, could rule, and could even set new laws for an entire nation. Her triumph was not merely personal. It challenged an entrenched cultural and political tradition that had endured for generations. Under the Zhou dynasty, Wu Zetian implemented policies that stabilized the country, while sending clear warnings to dissenters. She continued to promote talented individuals from all walks of life, including those of humble origin, while purging disloyal officials, ensuring that her power remained unchallenged. As a result, despite sweeping political changes, the state functioned smoothly, and the image of the female emperor became both a symbol of authority and the linchpin maintaining order. Another striking aspect was how she managed the court and the imperial family. Potentially dangerous princes were kept in check through political skill, strategic maneuvering, and at times ruthless measures. Wu Zetian knew that the throne could not survive if any seed of opposition remained, and she was willing to eliminate even those closest to her if they became a threat. To the outside world, she was both an icon of authority and an embodiment of fear. A woman standing above all, unbound by sentiment or tradition. Her ascension and the founding of the Zhou dynasty left a lasting impression on how historians and later generations viewed power. Some labelled her a tyrant, cruel and spectral, the haunting presence of the harem brought to the forefront. Yet from a strategic and pragmatic perspective, Wu Zetian was simply a master of the game of power, understanding that it belonged not by birthright, but to those bold enough to seize it. This is what made her an enduring symbol, a figure no historian could overlook for a millennium without shuddering. The moment she set foot on the throne, history changed. The old order in which only men could hold supreme authority was broken. The shadows of the inner court became a source of legitimate power, concentrated in the hands of a woman. From that point on, Wu Zetian was not merely an empress or a dowager regent. She became the sole emperor in Chinese history, the founder of the Zhou dynasty, and living proof that power is not a male prerogative, but a game for anyone ambitious and wise enough to claim it. Under the throne of the Zhou dynasty, Wu Zetian was more than just a symbol of power. She was a ruler with sharp political insight. She understood that a throne could not endure without order, loyalty among officials, and a strong economy. From the very moment she declared herself emperor, she launched a series of strategic reforms designed both to consolidate her power and reshape the machinery of government. One of her most remarkable moves was her approach to talent. For centuries, officials were chosen largely based on family background, lineage, and political connections. Wu Zetian broke with this tradition, expanding the imperial examinations and giving special preference to those of humble origins but exceptional ability. Scholars from rural areas, people who had previously held no influence, were promoted to key positions, becoming indispensable arms of the court. In this way, she not only attracted absolute loyalty, but also created a new class of officials entirely dependent on her authority. Her reforms extended beyond personnel to the economy. Wu Zetian strengthened agriculture by developing irrigation systems, encouraging the expansion of farmland, and implementing fairer taxation policies. As farmers produced more, the state granaries filled, reducing the court's dependence on powerful families or factions. At the same time, public trust in the Empress's governance grew. Economic stability created a favorable political environment, allowing Wu Zetian to secure her power for the long term. Culture and religion were equally important to her rule. Buddhism, already popular but underutilized politically, became a tool of both spiritual and political influence. Wu Zetian sponsored the construction of temples, towering pagodas, and colossal statues such as the Leshan giant Buddha, while promoting the dissemination of Buddhist teachings. These projects were not just spiritual symbols, they reinforced her image as the heavenly empress. Religious ceremonies and widely circulated scriptures sanctified her authority, making people and officials see her not just as a woman at the head of the court, but as a ruler appointed by heaven itself. These policies produced a court that was dynamic, stable, and relatively fair in the eyes of the people. But this fairness did not mean her power was limited. Every reform was carefully calculated to strengthen her authority, ensuring that all major decisions revolved around her, and that every faction from officials to princes understood that loyalty was paramount, while opposition spelled destruction. Alongside these enlightened reforms, Wu Zetian cultivated a darker, more terrifying side of power. She knew that reforms and propaganda alone were insufficient to maintain the throne. The palace and government had to be controlled through fear, with a system that detected plots before they could take shape. This led to the creation of a notorious network of secret agents, spies infiltrating every corner of the palace, monitoring every word, gesture, and alliance among officials and princes. A rumor, a suspicious glance, or a sparsely attended banquet could all serve as grounds for purges. Over the years, chilling legends about Wu Zetian took hold, recorded not only in folklore, but also in historical texts. Tales circulated of terrifying trials of the Empress, allegedly eliminating even her own sons if necessary, and of mysterious deaths among opposing officials or concubines. Not all of these accounts can be verified yet. The blend of fact and legend forged the fearsome image of the she-tiger devouring her younger symbol, both horrifying and commanding, ensuring that no one dared to challenge her. These brutal episodes suppressed dissent and reinforced a climate of fear, compelling even the boldest princes or officials to bow before her authority. She left no room for betrayal. Anyone who crossed her faced dire consequences. The truly frightening aspect was that even the loyal could never feel entirely secure, for no one knew what the next day might bring. Simultaneously, the stories of murder, purges, and ruthlessness became part of her political mythology. Though sometimes exaggerated, they reflected a truth power under Wu Zetian was absolute, and she wielded every tool, economic, political, and violent, to protect her throne. That darkness became the hallmark of the Zhou court, a reminder that no matter how enlightened reforms might be, survival depended on suppressing all threats. Thus, under Wu Zetian, power and reform walked hand in hand with fear and darkness. On one hand, she was a brilliant ruler, valuing talent, promoting the economy and culture, and creating a stable court respected by the people. On the other, she was an uncompromising empress, willing to purge anyone in her path, making the Zhou dynasty both a model of astute governance and a warning of the cruelty absolute power can bring. It was this mixture of light and shadow that defined Wu Zetian, the only woman in Chinese history to sit on the throne with unquestioned authority, a symbol of power beyond gender, yet a haunting figure in both historical memory and popular imagination. As age began to etch itself onto Wu Zetian's face, the absolute power she once wielded started to falter. The glorious years of the only female emperor in Chinese history became distant memories, giving way to a harsh and unyielding reality. Her health was failing, her body plagued by lingering pains, muscle weakness, and even deteriorating eyesight, making the task of governing the empire more challenging than ever. Yet physical frailty was only part of the problem. The real threat came from simmering political pressures and court intrigues that now began to shake the foundations of her throne. During the Zhou dynasty, Wu Zetian had built an intricate web of power, where loyal officials and secret agents monitored every corner of the palace. Over time, however, that network weakened. Those who had devoted their lives to her were now aging or passing away, while newcomers lacked the experience to maintain order. Within the royal family, relationships that were already complex grew increasingly strained. The Wu clan, once the backbone of her authority, gradually lost influence as princes, officials, and generals sought to reclaim their positions. From the shadows she had once created, seeds of rebellion began to stir. Even minor uprisings sent waves of tension through the court. Officials could no longer be counted on as fully loyal, and princes from the lineages of her former sons or from the old Li family maneuvered to restore the previous order. Anxiety spread through the palace like wildfire. Wu Zetian, who had once held the empire in her iron grip, now confronted the unsettling truth that power was no longer absolute, and that her throne could be wrested from her if she failed to adapt or fight back. Amid this uncertainty, her advisors and close princes presented her with a bitter choice. The court demanded abdication, a measured step to prevent a destructive civil war that could ravage the nation. After decades of ruling, Wu Zetian stepped aside. There were no grand ceremonies, no triumphant celebrations, only the quiet handover to the Tang dynasty, restoring power to the Li family she had once surpassed to establish the Zhou dynasty. Her decision to relinquish the throne was not a sign of weakness or lack of intellect, but a sober recognition of the limits imposed by age, health, and shifting political realities. Following her abdication, Wu Zetian retained no real power, yet she maintained an imposing presence within the palace. No longer emperor, she was known only as the Empress Zetian, a formal title stripped of authority. Her final years were marked by quiet reflection, absent of conspiracies and bloody purges, filled instead with contemplation and memories of a life dominated by power, ambition, and the dark shadows she had once cast. Though she no longer ruled, the name Wu Zetian lived on in the minds of people in history books and in legend. Her influence endured through reforms, religious projects, and political changes she had implemented. At the same time, tales of ruthless authority, assassinations, and factional purges haunted both the populace and future generations of officials. She became a figure both feared and respected, a terrifying yet undeniably talented force in Chinese history. On her final day, Wu Zetian passed away in silence, without the grand ceremonies of an emperor or the lavish honors she had once enjoyed upon her ascension. Her departure mirrored the essence of her later years. Absolute power can be attained, yet it is fragile before the flow of time, the course of life, and the shifting tides of politics. With her death, the Tang dynasty and the Li family reclaimed the throne, restoring the old order. Yet no one could erase the image of the woman who had been the sole ruler of all under heaven, who defied tradition, and who shook Chinese history with intelligence, ambition, and relentless ruthlessness. In the memory of posterity, Wu Zetian embodied a strange fusion of light and darkness. She was a brilliant strategist, a reformer, and a guiding force for her nation, yet also a fearsome figure merciless in purges, a woman who inspired terror that even her sons and closest officials could not escape. This duality made her name more than that of a historical figure. It became a living symbol of power, ambition, and the delicate boundary between greatness and cruelty. Looking back on her life, from a clever girl in the court of Emperor Taizong to a proud empress, a powerful regent, the only female emperor in Chinese history, and finally, the silent empress, Zetian Wu. Zetian wrote a story unlike any other. It was an epic of power, darkness, and solitude, a journey experienced only by those bold enough to challenge the established order of the world.